You turn on the news, and it just feels like we're stuck in this endless cycle of conflict. There's a war over here, tensions rising over there. It's like a constant drumbeat in the background of our lives.
There's this line from an old gospel song that just nails this feeling, I think. It says, "The weariness is endless." And that's it, isn't it? It's that deep, profound exhaustion so many of us feel when peace seems so far away and the stories of conflict just keep piling up.
And look, this isn't just some vague feeling, right? It's a tragic, concrete reality. Just take a look at the news from this past September. The clashes between Israel and Hezbollah, they resulted in over 500 deaths. That's the highest number in a single month since their 2006 war. It's a gut-wrenching reminder of the very real human cost we see day in and day out.
We usually try to explain these conflicts by talking about politics or religion or history or territory. But what if there's another factor? A hidden driver that's pouring gasoline on an already volatile world. Okay, let's really get into this.
So what we're going to do now is explore what might seem like a surprising accelerant for global conflict, the climate itself. It turns out that the environmental crisis we're all facing is way more connected to the violence we see around the world than you might think. So first things first, to get this, you have to understand who's really driving the climate crisis. And as you can see here, it's primarily the developed, industrialized countries. We're talking about places like North America, Europe, China. They are by far the biggest source of the CO2 emissions that are changing our planet.
Okay, but now, flip the coin. Here's where it gets really, really interesting. When we look at who is most vulnerable to climate change, to the droughts, the floods, the extreme weather, it's a completely different map. It's sub-Saharan Africa, it's South Asia, it's parts of South America. Notice anyone missing from that list? Yeah, the countries causing the problem. And this right here, this is what people mean when they talk about climate injustice. It's incredibly stark when you put it side by side. On one hand, you've got the developed world causing most of the damage. And on the other, you have developing, often agricultural regions suffering the worst of the consequences. The people who did the least to cause this are paying the absolute highest price.
So let's zoom in a bit. Let's get away from the high-level data and see what this actually looks like on the ground. Because behind these maps and stats, there's a devastating human price. And all too often, that price is paid in war. Let's take the conflict in Darfur, Sudan. It blew up in 2003. Now, we often hear it described as an ethnic war, and there are elements of that for sure. But the spark was climate change. The Sahara Desert was expanding, and a brutal drought wiped out farmland, forcing nomadic herders and settled farmers into a desperate, bloody fight over what little was left. The result? 300,000 people killed, over 2 million forced to flee their homes. And you see this same tragic pattern in another devastating conflict, the Syrian civil war. A lot of people don't know this, but right before the war started, Syria was hit with the worst drought in its recorded history. It totally collapsed the country's agriculture. 1.5 million farmers were forced to leave their land and cram into already crowded cities. That created the perfect social tinderbox that was just waiting for a match. And that mass displacement, the one that started with a drought, well, that's what led to one of the most heartbreaking images of the last decade. The photo of Aylan Kurdi, that little 3-year-old boy on a Turkish beach. He became the face of the global refugee crisis, a crisis that had its roots not just in politics, but literally in the parched, unforgiving soil. So, wow. In the face of all this, these huge, tangled crises of climate and war, how do people even respond? Well, beyond the politics and the fighting, people find other ways to process it all. And that brings us to a totally different kind of frontline, the world of art, and specifically, the work of the street artist Banksy. You've probably seen this piece. It's one of his most famous, painted on a wall in the West Bank. It shows a protester, right? He's winding up to throw something. But instead of a rock or a Molotov cocktail, a weapon of conflict, he's holding a bouquet of flowers. It's such a simple, powerful idea. It just asks, what if we answered violence with something beautiful? And this idea just pops up again and again in his work, wherever he goes. He paints a little girl frisking a heavily armed soldier. He paints a cute little kitten on the rubble of a bombed-out building in Gaza. He turns a grim military surveillance tower into a fun carnival swing ride. In Ukraine, a kid flips Vladimir Putin in a judo match. It's art that talks back to power, that finds a little bit of humanity and hope right on the walls that are built to divide us. So Banksy is literally painting on physical walls, political walls. But what if there's a deeper kind of wall we need to think about? An invisible one that might just be the foundation for all these other conflicts. This brings us to a really powerful philosophical idea.
It's a concept called the dividing wall of hostility. It's a phrase that comes from the ancient biblical book of Ephesians, and it's used to describe all the barriers we humans build between each other. Barriers of prejudice, of law, of pure hate, all the things that separate us from them.
So what are the bricks that build this wall? Well, they're everything we've been talking about. Citizen versus refugee, nation versus nation, made worse by climate injustice, rich versus poor, us versus them, believer versus non-believer, one race versus another. Every single one is a brick, building this wall of hostility higher and higher. But the text that introduces this idea doesn't just describe the problem, it proposes this pretty radical solution. It talks about a peacemaking force so powerful that it makes the two one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. It's this vision of a peace that doesn't just manage conflict, but actually dissolves the divisions that cause it in the first place, creating a whole new unified humanity.
So, that's where all this leaves us. From the climate injustice pitting countries against each other, to the art on the walls, to the invisible walls in our own hearts and communities, it all comes down to one big question. If our divisions really are the walls, what does it actually take for us, right now, to tear them down?